technology, ding, is against you. It's maybe one of those days. Moving on. So for those who were not here, the computer froze. Yeah, Dr. Mauer's been telling me that's been a real pain with this. So here we go. So we'll do it this way. It doesn't freeze nearly as rapidly if we do that. So the other thing it does, yeah, obviously that's physiology, the copulatory or intercourse, fertilization, the zygote, and then different terms, development of gestation and parturition. Nothing real, and again, that to me is more. So here, the common feature aspect is the important aspect to me. So homologous or analogous doesn't mean I use the terms interchangeably. Testes and ovaries, penis and clitoris, that you will see. Primary organs, testes and ovaries, of course. These are double duty organs, so they basically have dual glandular functions. You find the pancreas is the same way, for instance. Basically, what it does is they have both endocrine and exocrine. The endocrine function, it has to do with the production of hormones, testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone, because it goes directly into the bloodstream. The exocrine means ducts, and just like I told you before, vas deferens or ductus deferens, or ovarian duct or fallopian tube, those are basically carrying the gametes by way of a ducted system to another location, in this case, the location for fertilization, that are there. So that is, the endocrine function is about these, the exocrine rather, and the endocrine is about these. And we'll get into that physiologically. Everything else, external, internal genitalia, whatever is male or female, totally. And this is the physiological. We did not do endocrine, so I'm not going to do this now. But nearly every gland and nearly every system has a certain amount of monitoring. The hypothalamus in general is where the blood-brain barrier is weakest, so we're able to assess chemical and other types of balances that are there. It's able to assess the availability of certain chemical substances, and if necessary, signal initially the posterior pituitary and then the anterior pituitary to basically trigger the gonad. So you're going to, when you learn about pituitary, 3 of the hormones are basically very, very important to reproductive physiology. And so you'll learn about GnRH and FSH and LH, as well as the testosterone and the inhibin, the roles that they do. Again, so that you look at this as the axis they're talking about. We'll spend a lot of times with this. This inhibin is interesting because that really, it normally is releasing it, and then you're going to see there's some variations that are kind of interesting, and we won't get to the end of next term with reprophysiology. Because female reprophysiology, it's like the onset of menstruation, the onset of childbearing years, etc. So I'm not going to go through all that, and we obviously will come back to it. I just want to see where it ends. Again, we're not going to do, I'm not doing. We're not going to go into first, remember first and second polar bodies and all that stuff, reduction divisions. To me, mitosis is all about make the same thing every time. Okay, meiosis is about make diversity. You know, chiasmata, law of independent assortment, those big, what it's all about. We're learning about that. I mean, we're Mendelian genetics. So, and we're not going to do the sister chromatids and the homologous pairs at this point in time. I would be familiar with it. You all know haploid and diploid. There's nothing unusual about that. We're not going to go into PMAT right now. We do a little bit about that in our first unit in physiology, where I do my version of cell and molecular condensed. Okay, so I do it Stein way. So I love things like prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telekinesis. You know, love that. My favorite. So I'm not going to overview it. I'm not going to overview it. Not going to overview it. Not going to overview it. Don't want to look at it. Don't want to look at it. Don't want to. They dedicate a lot of stuff. I'm sure that's interesting. There we are. We start with the testes. Okay. And obviously they lie within the scrotum. So interestingly, we start with the first aspect of it. They came from the abdominal pelvic cavity and effectively are still surrounded by tissue from that cavity that has descended by way of a structure called the spermatic cord. Again, an important term for you to know. It makes its way through a tunnel or passageway of one of the many tunnels in the inguinal, under the inguinal ligament. The inguinal ligament, again, from the anterior superior iliac spine to the symphysis pubis. And in that we have the femoral artery, we have the femoral veins, we have a variety of nerve structures, all sorts of important stuff, all sorts of important lymphatics and things like that. But there are tunnels and passageways. And I remember doing hernia surgery when I was assisting on that. And the most important thing when they made the incision, that days they did all these openers before the mesh and things like that. The mesh wasn't very good. The most important thing, the surgeon would say, the first thing we have to do is identify those vital structures and retract them and protect them. We don't want to nick one of them because you could lose someone. A big hurt. So, I mean, I remember that acutely like it was yesterday. And then effectively you push whatever it is, either back up or back in or back down, and oversew it and reinforce it to keep it where it's supposed to be. Simplify it. That's there. But so those are basically the testes descend by way of that passageway. They used to describe a structure, and if it's on a test, I'll identify it or take it out. It's called the gubernaculum. Funny word, Gubernaculum. And that was the strip of tissue that facilitated the pulling down of the testes. Effectively, it's all about temperature. So testes, optimal sperm production requires a temperature gradient where in the testicular area it's a couple of degrees Celsius lower than body temperature. That's the whole boxers and briefs thing. It's one of the first things they talk to you about in infertility, if it's judged to be the male. Okay. And, you know, basically if somebody's wearing briefs, they tell them, hey, go to boxer shorts, because maybe you're just compromising that temperature gradient a little bit. Okay. So, and if you hadn't heard about that, it's certainly worth, again, it's more physiology. My context, both here, less so for anatomy and much more for physiology, and it's one of those self-admitted areas I don't know a lot about. Okay? I know a lot of, as you'll find out, I know a lot about blood, and I know a lot about gastrointestinal and other types of things that are there, bones and joints and all that good stuff. What I don't know a lot about is reproductive. It's not my long suit. My context comes from problems in reproductive. I don't have biological children. You were telling me. I should have known. Joking. So that's my context. My first wife and I spent 5 years trying everything to have children biologically, and we're unsuccessful in doing so. So it's just the way it works. So I understand a lot about it from that. We went all over the country doing things that are now commonplace. Now IVF was in its infancy. Surrogate parenting was in its infancy. You couldn't even talk to people about it because everybody looked at, oh my God, what are you doing? You know, it was such a generalized misunderstanding. And I know that as the years have gone on, that has been a great deal of hardship on my first one, fortunately. A great deal of hardship. Suffice it to say, that's one of the things that really has affected her over time. Nevertheless, so the testes descend. The testes are, and effectively it's a series of tubules, nothing more. Within those tubules, when we get down to the cellular basis, they're called the seminiferous tubules. You're going to see when they show you the images that are accompanying the PowerPoint, a variety of cells that play pivotal roles. The seminiferous tubules is where the sperm are produced. Okay. When the sperm are produced, they're really just almost like circular cells. They're highly undeveloped. They don't resemble what you and I would look at a sperm cell under a microscope or have seen micrographs of. All of that maturation occurs in the next series of tubules that's delivered to, called the epididymis. Okay. The epididymis surrounds and collects and allows those sperm to mature over maybe 3 weeks roughly. and to become more acquainted with the form that we see with the tail and the movement, etc., that are there. They are stored there until such time as they're ejaculated. And when they're ejaculated, they go into the ductus deferens, or vas deferens as it used to be. The ductus deferens carries it until it joins with secretions from the seminal gland. As you will see, the bulk of the secretions that constitute ejaculant are by no means cells, although sperm, massive amounts. We're talking hundreds of millions of sperm in an ejaculant of, I don't know, half a teaspoon. Half of them go the wrong way anyway. Just saying. Okay. So they join, once they join the seminal gland, they become the ejaculatory duct. And then the next step, very close to it, that continuation of the ejaculatory duct sort of comes in and surrounded by prostate, where it joins the urethra, and now you have the shared system. And that's the significant anatomical difference. Rather than having a separate system as we do in the female, we have a shared system in male. So it's a lot of good news, bad news, particularly when you get to the physiology, and maybe that week and a half or so we'll have to talk diseases, which I have a lot of fun with. Anyway, I do it a lot in micro. I do my micro more clinically for the nurses because they're going to see it. And so there's 3 sets of accessory glands in addition to these major structures, and the urethra is more complex, much more complex than the female. The seminal glands, which are rather large, and again, the bulk of the ejaculant is seminal gland secretions. Prostate, maybe there's 2/3 here and 1/3 here. Bulbal urethra really doesn't contribute to it. It's a lubricant to allow the passage of the ejaculant. But again, they're all significant anatomical structures. Voila. So as we move on to here, you see sort of the appearance. Consistently in both, and this is one of those interesting analogous or homologous relationships. The exterior of the interior of the testes, where everything is happening. The exterior is hard, white, and fibrous, and it has the same name as a similar structure in the ovaries. It's called the tunica albuginea, white tunic. Okay, so they're very, very similar, hard and fibrous. It's surrounded by a layer of actually peritoneum, because remember, it's effectively started in the peritoneal cavity. The ovaries are still there, okay, called the tunica vaginalis. So you will see that as we move on. So effectively, this is where it starts to collect these structures. This is the head or start of the epididymis. That you should be. Can you see the cursor there? No, yes, maybe. I can't tell from my view. Yes? Cool. And so it goes all the way to the tail, and as the tail transitions, now you have the vas deferens, one on either side alongside the bladder. As they swing around, you'll see it start to widen. This is the start of the ejaculatory duct. That's the seminal gland. So then immediately as it forms that ejaculatory duct, it enters effectively the prostate gland, and now you get the urethra coming out of remember it comes out from the undersurface of the bladder. And now you have the shared system as it exits. So this initial exit point is called the prostatic urethra. As soon as it passes, so to speak, from interior to exterior, it passes through it's called the membranous urethra, as you will see shortly. And then now you have the so-called spongiform urethra, which is named for these bodies that fill with blood during arousal. So you got everything there, and all the way until you finally get the opening, which is called, in most terms, we talked about it a little bit in bone. When you have a tunnel with a passageway with an opening, it's called a meatus. So you have the external auditory and internal auditory meatus, or meati. So usually it's like octopi, octopus. Do we want me to go through that sheep and sheep again? Deer and deer again? I don't think so. Fish and fishes? Thanks. Moose and meese? I saw a putty cat. I did see a putty. Sylvester, Tweety. Help me. I was telling Dr. Badger about fractured fairy tales. Rocky and Bullwinkle. The voice of that, the late, great, brilliant voice of Edward Everett Horton, who was in my favorite movie from 1937, which is my favorite movie of all time, Lost Horizon. He played one of the lead characters. Loved it. That's because I'm old. Not dead yet. So, the scrotum is basically some skin and fascia, just loose connective tissue, outside of the abdominal cavity, yes, at the root of the penis. Paired testes, roughly 3 degrees Celsius lower. Optimizes sperm. It's divided in the midline. Nobody cares. Okay. The names of the muscles. I never know which is which. Okay. And you'll see it on the illustration. I'm probably not going to ask you. So, on a test question, I'll say, what muscles support are part of the scrotum? They're named the dartos and the cremaster. Those are the names of the muscles. You'll see it better on the illustration. So if we look over here, here's the cremaster is up here, and I can even see the dartos. Help me. But it's hard for me to see because it's so much smaller on this. I'll find it. So cremaster down here. Oh, the dartos is probably below here, I would think. Nevertheless, that's why I just put the two of them together. I don't think there's a good illustration. So if we go back and you'll look at that, this is the spermatic cord. This is the structure that's filled with blood vessels, a unique feature. And I probably have mentioned it before. There is something, just like there's a blood-brain barrier, there's a blood-testicular barrier. Sperm do not get produced until puberty. They would be genetically foreign to your immune system. When there's a traumatic, if someone's struck or kicked in the testicular area and some of the sperm leak out, your body mounts an immune response to them. It's vigorous. They're foreign tissue. So there is a barrier that separates your immune system, the bloodstream effectively, from the structures that are conveying the sperm. So that's another important issue that's part of it as well. But you can see this is filled with lymphatics, nerves, and that's why when it's struck there or irritated, it's extraordinarily painful, as I think everybody knows. So the testes, again, 2 layers, vaginalis, same as the ovaries, and the albuginea, which is a distinct, dense connective tissue fibrous capsule. It's not a whole lot different thing about the sclera of the eye or anything like that. It's but if nothing else, stoidy, as we used to say in my old neighborhood. Okay. So how does the sperm get there? This is the part I'm not that interested in. More graduate anatomy than anatomy here. There's a series of tubules that go effectively from the seminiferous tubules, which you have to know, to the epididymis. So a lot of the test questions are typically trace the flow of sperm, and it would be testes, seminiferous tubules, epididymis, vas deferens or ductus deferens, ejaculatory duct, something like that. And you need to have them out of order, and you have to pick the right one, right? You've seen that movie before. Nothing new about that. Not terribly creative, but you got to throw an easy one in sooner or later. So again, head, body, and tail, and the sperm are stored there until such time as they're ejaculated. Because temperature is so important, there's an elaborate venous plexus that is absorbing heat. Okay, so the cooling aspect and all the stuff that I mentioned was in there. So now we get a little bit closer look, and I think this to me is a very telling illustration. So effectively, it's just a series of ductules. Nobody laughs at this joke anymore. Majority is preparing you not to laugh at it. When I see this, I think of one thing: ramen noodles. See, I got a couple of smiles. It's college students. College students know from ramen noodles. So don't dip this into hot water. See, Emma's the only good audience I have. Do you like that one? So the ramen noodles, that here's a term I hate. It resonated with me. What are you, a tuning fork? No, I don't. That crystallized it on my mind. Shut up. The same thing. We just watched a football Sunday. The offensive coordinator of some team, when they did terrible, I assume full responsibility. I'm so happy. I thought it was my fault. I assume full responsibility for losing the game. Good, because I thought I was the one they were going to play. I wasn't even there. Like, who else? Who else's effing responsibility would it be? Doofus. Nevertheless, so these are the seminiferous tubules, and you can look inside and see. We'll talk about the cells. So effectively, they lead into a collecting system. So you can see it here. Okay, and without going too elaborately, and eventually, this is just a continuation of more of these tubules that are storing and facilitating the maturation of the sperm. And when it gets to the tail, then finally now this is the start of the ductus deferens. Once that tail kind of ends way up here, now when it becomes less sort of contorted, okay, less contorted, less convoluted, if you want to use the same word. Now we have the ductus deferens heading up, going toward effectively the bladder and the penis. And just showing you like this. Interesting side note, undescended testicles are called cryptorchism. And it's certainly a risk factor. Testicular cancer and testicular problems are more common than you think. Okay, another one of these, I'm sure everybody in the class has had MMR, measles, mumps, and rubella immunizations. In the old days, people who, if for some reason they weren't immunized, or like me, didn't have the disease, but I got the mumps shot when I was in my late 20s. Mumps affects glands, typically swollen salivary glands. It also, in both men and women, can cause severe inflammation of testes and ovary, much more common testes in the male. That's why an adult of those diseases, measles, mumps, German measles, chickenpox, a whole lot worse. Okay, and children tolerate them much better. That's very, very consistent. So this is a risk factor that's there. And again, most cancers typically are painless, and it's a mass. And it argues to the same thing I mentioned before, and I don't mean to be off color, but women are much more conscientious about reproductive health than men. Remember I told you all about it before? It's true. It just is. Okay. I mean, you can debate it if you want, and I'm not making a value judgment. You know, men do not do self-testicular exams. You know, it's typically maybe their partner will identify if there's a lump. That's about the size of it, okay, as opposed to them. Again, as long as it's working, they're not looking into it. It's just the nature of what it's like. Okay, so here we are again with the structures that go through the ductal system. It begins with the epididymis and ends obviously as it exits the urethra. So all of these ductules, and you can see there's about, again, that continuous pattern of taking a lot of length and compacting it into obviously a very small area is here, 20 feet. Okay, pseudostratified epithelial, stereocilia, surface area, absorb fluid, fine. I'm not so worried about the epithelial lining that's there, but to understand that obviously if there's 20 feet of length, all contorted into that small area, there's a lot of maturation that goes on. So they slowly, through at a rate, takes about 3 weeks, not just around 20 days, finally are able to swim, and they can be stored for a period of time. And then effectively, this is a kind of peristaltic action. Again, squeeze, push, and it occurs relatively rapidly when climax is reached. So the deferens themselves, that's also pretty long. Okay? So when we talk about roughly 2.5 centimeters, okay? So that's pushing 20 centimeters in length, maybe. Inguinal cavity up through the pelvic cavity. They expand, they call it an expansion ampulla, joins the seminal vesicle, and when it joins the exit of the seminal vesicles, now we have the ejaculatory duct. Okay? And effectively, when you hear about someone having a vasectomy, which is a very effective and nowadays reversible, which wasn't thought of, it is much more effective than tubal ligations and less problematic to occur. And the notion when this first occurred, one of the guys I went to podiatry school with Lotus many years ago, he had one. He and his wife didn't want kids. He had one done when we were like our first or second year. We're like, well, does everything work the way it's supposed to? He said, there was no problem. He said, we just didn't want to have kids. Okay, fine. My stepchildren were born in 81, 83, 85, 91, and 93. The 91 and 93s are post reversal of vasectomy for my wife's former husband. So that's 100% proof of reversibility. Does make it a little hectic around the holidays. I mean, if you what? Yeah, there's a lot of people. That's why the good Lord made gift cards. I know it's the easy way out. Just get them an Amazon gift card. Let them get what they want. If you don't like them, you give them like a $20 card. If you like them, you right. There's a gift card, $5. Shows you where you're at. You may even get a penny if they have an 0.01 gift card. So we move on. The urethra, once it finally forms, after it exits the prostate, you have, when it's in the prostate, once it has joined, basically the continuation of the ejaculatory duct is called the prostatic urethra. It's really effectively surrounded more than anything else would be the way to describe it. Okay. And then they call it the intermediate or membranous part. So there is a passageway, albeit small, effectively from inside the abdominal peritoneal cavity to outside. And then effectively the lengthier portion is the spongy urethra all the way, and the appropriate name, you could use the term meatus, but external urethral orifice. And you see this illustration, you'll undoubtedly see it again, practical wise, and it gives you an idea of the relationships. So here's prostatic urethra, somewhat wider because you have a lot of things flowing into it. You have the tiny amount of membrane that's there, and maybe just those tiny bulbal urethral glands adding a certain amount of lubrication. And then comparatively speaking, if you look at it from this passageway, a straight passageway. As you'll notice, the passageway in the penis itself, and there's variations obviously in length, is on the sort of under or volar surface. And it's surrounded by one of these, it's called the corpus, which means body, spongiosum. That and the two larger ones on either side and slightly superior to it are called the corpus or corpora, because there's two, cavernosum. Those are the bodies that during excitation and the release of this very interesting chemical that we'll spend a lot of time with called nitric oxide. Don't be confused with nitrous oxide, which is laughing gas. Nitric oxide plays a really pivotal role in everything from brain development. It acts as a neurotransmitter, and blood vessels release it depending on certain circumstances, and it causes vascular dilation. The combination of events at stimulation or excitation, which are facilitated by the parasympathetic nervous system, we get to all this in parasympathetic, is basically a release of this. It causes those structures to enlarge and swell. The circular fashion there, the way it's arranged, keeps the passageway open, and this basically creates the erectile state probably more efficiently. This is more dedicated to keeping the opening there. And interesting, when they swell, it occludes because they're veins, fluid leaving out until that period of excitation subsides or post-climax. Okay, so it's really very fast. And if you didn't know it, there are a zillion commercials everywhere since the discovery of erectile dysfunction medications, and all of them basically work the same way. They inhibit the breakdown of nitric oxide, and that's what So anti-nitric oxide lasts longer and does that even for people who have somewhat significant problems. Doesn't always work, but it works pretty effectively. We'll do a little bit more about that down the road with regard to some of the clinical manifestations. So the penis is the male copulatory organ. Everybody knew that. Okay, root, shaft, and the enlargement at the tip is called the glans. And at birth, it is covered by a foreskin. Some of it is religiously oriented, like in our case in Judaism. Okay, 8 days. Hey, I didn't have any say so. 8 days. That it is super. You could even do that on really big time holidays. It's a very interesting religious thing. So, for instance, a lot of hospitals will do it almost at birth. Yeah, and I think there's probably some discussion that goes on vis-a-vis that. But and there's a ceremonial ritual. Go back and watch Robin Hood Men in Tights. Mel Brooks. Okay. He's a purveyor of fine wines and a moil. Rabbi Tucker. That's the name that we give to the person who does that. Okay. I'll have to show you that clip from Men in Tights. So the trouble with this is it is predisposed to being damaged easily. Okay. And as you can see, the numbers are startlingly high. This is one of the things they look for in Nazi Germany, to see when somebody said that they weren't Jewish, all that I could go into chapter and verse. A significant reduction in HIV because it's not so much a barrier, it's the fact that it gets traumatized and can tear, and that's what facilitates any kind of infectious particle. That's why anal intercourse is more of a problem than vaginal intercourse. Okay? Because the anal mucosa is not designed for that, where the vaginal mucosa is. I'm not making a value judgment, I'm just telling you an anatomical fact. Okay, so here you are. These are the erectile tissue, the spongiosum. Yeah, they expand to form the bulb. Okay, the paired ones are and you should know the distinction between them. And fills with blood, etc. Same illustration you saw before. When you hear the term perineum, years ago, we spelled Peroneal for the lateral calf. In anatomy, we call that the fibular area. We now have muscles called fibularis longus, brevis, and tertius. They used to be called perineus. Okay, and it was so confusing because perineum with an I versus perineum with an O. And it's both male and the female we call it the vulva, between the pubic symphysis, the coccyx, and the ischial tuberosities. Scrotum is suspended, penis, anus, etc. You'll see it here. And wait, when we get to the female and you see the distinction between the two, remarkable similarities, at least in my view. So you can see the advantage infectious disease-wise is the remarkable degree of separation from the anus with the genital area. And that's such a big factor in vaginal infections and urinary tract in the female, which are not nearly as common in the male. Okay. Ischial tuberosity, symphysis pubis, coccyx. So that's that roughly diamond-shaped area, not exactly the same. Okay. The seminal glands are on the posterior aspect of the bladder. Okay. Smooth muscle, stimulated by ejaculation, which interestingly is sympathetic, not parasympathetic. And a lot, when we get into the physiology, it's all about pH and enzymes playing a role. That balances it. You got to have something that'll neutralize the acidity of the mucus and the action and vaginally of lactobacillus. We'll get into a lot of that. So it's alkaline with power sperm fructose, not glucose. Okay, coagulating enzymes and local signalers, which we originally defined as coming from the prostate that affect multiple systems, particularly inflammation, called prostaglandins. It is that fluid that fluoresces under ultraviolet light, and it's the bulk of the volume of the semen. So when you see the crime shows and they're looking to see if there was evidence of some type of sexual activity, they get, it's called a Woods light, capital WOOD apostrophe S. We used to have one in the office because we could see skin fluoresces. It's not unlike what you can use those in the lab when you're using fluorescent dyes to identify things, and it would have that distinct fluorescence and spray it the same way they do something when they spray it with luminol to look for blood traces that haven't been wiped up. And you see those on all the crime shows. Okay, so that's also part of it. The other one, and we're just about done, prostate encircles it, smaller than you think, okay, contracts during ejaculation. This is the whiter fluid, not enough acidity to offset the alkalinity. The big deal is this PSA, because one of the things we use to assess prostate cancer is prostatic specific antigen. That's become the way, and I'll go into that later. It does play some kind of role in activating the sperms and more or less the rest of the volume other than the sperm. And then very little to say about this is just lubricant. Okay, maybe it neutralizes a little bit of the acidity of the urine, not a big deal. And we'll stop there and we'll get into more about this on Wednesday. And I suspect we'll just do some dissections and stuff in lab, if that's all right with you. You've been a wonderful audience. We'll be here Wednesday again, same time, same bad time, same bad station.